Chapter 1: Ice and Shadows. The wind howled a mournful song across the desolate, icy plains of Kepler 186 FS Moon. Boreas, the human research outpost, clung precariously to a rocky outcrop, a metallic scar on the frozen landscape. Inside, Dr. Aris Thorne, her face etched with the weariness of long shifts and countless failed experiments, peered through a microscope. The harsh fluorescent lights reflected in her tired eyes, amplifying the shadows beneath them. 38 years old, she carried the weight of a past research failure like a physical burden, a constant reminder of her ambition's fragility. "Anything, Aris?" Dr. Jian Li, her former student and now a valued colleague, leaned over her shoulder, his breath misting in the frigid air. Jian, a whirlwind of nervous energy and infectious enthusiasm, was the polar opposite of Aris's reserved nature. Aris adjusted the focus. "Something's off. The extremophile sample shows an unusual replication rate. Way beyond anything we've seen before." Jian peered into the microscope, his brow furrowing. "It's multiplying exponentially. The genetic markers are unintelligible. Never seen anything like it." A sudden alarm blared, jarring them from their concentration. Red lights flashed, painting the lab in an ominous glow. A panicked voice crackled over the intercom. "Containment breach in Sector 7. Multiple infections reported." Chaos erupted. The rhythmic hum of the lab's machinery was replaced by the shouts of panicked scientists and the clatter of emergency equipment. Aris felt a cold dread grip her heart. This wasn't a simple lab accident. This was something far worse. "Get to the clean room, Jian. Now!" Aris yelled, her voice barely audible above the din. She slammed the microscope slide into its protective case, her movement swift and decisive. Years of rigorous training kicked in, overriding the panic that threatened to consume her. As she raced towards the airlock, she glimpsed a scientist stumbling, his face pale and clammy, a hacking cough racking his body. He mumbled something incoherent, clutching his throat, before collapsing to the floor. The cold fear that had been a simmering dread became a burning inferno. This wasn't just an extremophile gone rogue, this was a nightmare come to life. This was something intelligent. And it was spreading. The airlock hissed open, revealing the unforgiving landscape outside. The wind whipped around the outpost, a constant reminder of their vulnerability, their isolation. As Aris stepped out, the faint whisper of the wind carried a chilling new sound, the rasping coughs of the infected, a silent scream echoing across the frozen wastes. The fight for survival had begun. Chapter 2: The Silent Scream. The solar flare hit without warning, a blinding, searing wave of electromagnetic energy that fried Boreas's communication systems. The outpost was plunged into a terrifying isolation, cut off from the rest of humanity. Aris, her face streaked with grime and exhaustion, surveyed the scene. The clean room, once a sanctuary of sterile order, was now a makeshift infirmary, filled with the weak gasps and labored breaths of the infected. "Dr. Li," Aris whispered, approaching a bed where Jian lay unconscious, his skin clammy and ashen. His breathing was shallow, ragged. A single tear traced a path through the grime on Aris's cheek. Jian had been like a son to her, his unwavering optimism a stark contrast to her own cynical realism. A younger researcher, Sarah Chen, her eyes wide with fear, approached cautiously. "The virus, it's mutating. The initial treatments are ineffective. It's adapting too quickly." Aris examined the latest data on a battered tablet. The virus's genetic code was shifting, evolving at an alarming rate, constantly outmaneuvering their attempts at containment. The initial symptoms were deceptively benign, a common cold, initially, followed by a catastrophic immune system collapse. Death followed swiftly. There was no time for sorrow, only action. "We need to focus on containment," Aris commanded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Seal off the affected areas. Anyone showing symptoms, immediate isolation." A low groan from Jian broke the tension. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, only to meet Aris's gaze. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper. "All the data. I managed to transmit something before the flare. He coughed, a rattling sound that echoed the death throes of the outpost's communication systems. With a final, agonizing breath, he slipped back into unconsciousness, his eyes glazing over. The silence that followed was heavier than the ice outside. Aris fought back tears. She knew it was likely a futile gesture, but she began frantically searching for the transmitted data, digging through damaged servers and backups. Amidst the chaotic jumble of error messages and corrupted files, she found it, a single, partially corrupted data packet. The data revealed the virus's genome. It was unbelievably complex, far beyond anything naturally occurring. Aris stared at the intricate code, her mind reeling. This wasn't a naturally occurring virus. This was engineered. A chilling realization sunk into her heart. They weren't facing a mere biological threat, they were facing a weapon. A weapon of unimaginable sophistication, designed for genocide. The silent scream echoed in the emptiness of space, a desperate cry for help from a world alone. Chapter 3: Desperate Synthesis. The flickering emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows across the faces of the remaining team members huddled in the main lab. Aris, her eyes bloodshot and her face grim, addressed them, her voice raspy but resolute. Gen's data reveals the virus's complexity. It's far beyond natural evolution. We need to focus on finding a weakness, a chink in its armor. Dr. Elena Petrova, a geneticist with a sharp intellect and even sharper tongue, spoke up. The virus is adapting too quickly for conventional treatments. We need something radical. Radical is what we have, Aris replied, her gaze sweeping across the grim faces. We're going to synthesize a countermeasure, a targeted bacteriophage. It'll be risky, but it's our only chance. The work began immediately. The lab, usually a place of calm, methodical research, was transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Researchers worked in shifts, fueled by adrenaline, black coffee, and a desperate hope. Aris, driven by a fierce determination to atone for her past failures, dove headfirst into the project, pushing herself and her team to the brink. Days bled into nights, each hour a precious struggle against the ticking clock. The virus seems to thrive on specific amino acids found in certain extremophiles, Dr. Benicio Reyes, a specialist in extremophile biology, announced, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. If we can synthesize a bacteriophage that targets these specific acids, we might be able to starve it out. A glimmer of hope sparked in the room. But the challenge was enormous. The virus was constantly mutating, adapting to any new treatment they tried. Frustration and despair gnawed at the team, but Aris refused to yield. She pushed them harder, her voice a sharp whip cracking through their fatigue, her determination a beacon in the gathering storm. Arguments flared. Scientists clashed over methodology, over resources, over the sheer desperation of the situation. But in the face of impending doom, these conflicts were quickly resolved. The common goal of survival, of humanity's survival, forged a bond stronger than any personal differences. They were a team, a collective of brilliant minds united against a common enemy. It wasn't just science, it was a battle for humanity's future. The air crackled not only with the energy of scientific discovery but also with the palpable tension of a fight against extinction. Time, as always, was their greatest enemy. Chapter 4: The Pyrrhic Victory. The synthesized bacteriophage, a fragile hope in a vial, was ready. But obtaining the necessary extremophile samples required a perilous journey across the moon's treacherous, blizzard-swept landscape. A supply depot, holding the crucial equipment for the mission, was located several kilometers from Boreas, across a chasm known for its unpredictable ice bridges and violent winds. The unexpected twist: during the journey, a catastrophic explosion rocked the depot. A methane leak, triggered by a faulty pressure valve, had resulted in a devastating fire. Aris, along with Elena and Benicio, reached the ravaged depot amidst a blizzard, the air thick with smoke and the stench of burning metal. Benicio, already weakened from the strain of the previous days, was injured during the chaotic escape from the exploding depot. His leg was badly twisted. "We have to get back to Boreas," Benicio gasped, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. "This is hopeless. The phage, it's useless now." "No," Aris snapped, her voice laced with steel. "We're not giving up now. We'll manage." Her own exhaustion was overwhelming, but her determination burned brighter. Elena, ever practical, assessed their situation. "We're short on supplies. We'll have to ration what we have. The phage, we can synthesize a smaller batch, but we risk failure." The return journey was even more perilous. Benicio, despite the agony, refused to be left behind. Aris and Elena had to carry him, his weight adding to their burden, the biting wind threatening to tear them from the icy cliffs. Every step was a victory against the brutal environment. Every breath was a victory against exhaustion. They were fighting not only the virus, but also the elements, their resilience a testament to human will. Reaching Boreas, they were met with a grim silence. More infections, fewer survivors. The time for a full-scale synthesis was gone, replaced with desperate hope of even a small batch of the life-saving bacteriophage. They had faced a horrifying loss in the depot, sacrificing supplies vital to a full synthesis. This was a Pyrrhic victory, a win achieved at a terrible cost, but a victory nonetheless. The fragile vial containing the phage was their only remaining hope. They were on borrowed time, and they knew it. Chapter 5: Echoes of Creation. The miniature batch of the bacteriophage was administered. Hope flickered, then dimmed. The initial results were promising, the virus's replication rate slowed significantly. But a chilling new development emerged. Lazarus, in its desperate struggle for survival, had begun integrating its own genetic code into the host's DNA. It wasn't just killing, it was fundamentally altering human biology. "It's rewriting the genome," Elena whispered, her face pale as she studied the data. "It's inserting its own genetic sequences. This isn't just an infection, it's a form of evolutionary hijacking." Panic threatened to overwhelm the team. This was a far more insidious threat than they had initially imagined. Lazarus wasn't just a weapon, it was a tool for genetic manipulation, a terrifying preview of a future where humanity's very essence could be altered beyond recognition. The implications were horrifying. Aris, however, refused to succumb to despair. Her mind raced, analyzing the data, searching for a solution. The phage, it's targeting specific amino acids. What if we modify it? What if we engineer it to prevent the genetic integration? A tense silence followed her suggestion. It was a risky idea, a gamble with potentially disastrous consequences. But it was their only hope. The race against time resumed, this time with an even greater sense of urgency. They worked through the night, exhausted but driven by a desperate will to survive, to prevent the fundamental alteration of their species. The lab buzzed with the frantic energy of scientists fighting to rewrite the script of their own extinction. Hours later, a breakthrough. Elena, her eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph, announced, "I've modified the phage targeting sequence. It now disrupts the integration process. It blocks Lazarus's ability to rewrite the human genome." The modified phage was immediately synthesized and administered. The results were agonizingly slow, but the change was undeniable. Lazarus's genetic integration stopped. The virus was still present, but its ability to fundamentally alter humanity was thwarted. The battle was far from won, but they had won a crucial battle, a battle for their species' very definition. They had stared into the abyss of genetic annihilation and emerged victorious. Chapter 6: The Lazarus Protocol. The modified phage worked. The virus was contained. The crisis, for now, was averted. A wave of exhaustion washed over the surviving team members, but it was mingled with a profound sense of relief, a hard-won triumph against overwhelming odds. The silence in Boreas was no longer the silence of death, it was the silence of shared experience, of profound relief. Then, the comm system crackled back to life. A voice, crackling with static but undeniably human, filled the room. "Boreas, do you read? Boreas, this is Earth Command." Tears welled in Aris's eyes. The isolation was over. They were no longer alone. The relief was short-lived, however. As the full data from Jian Li's transmission was finally decoded, a chilling truth emerged. Embedded within the virus's complex code was a message, a warning. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a probe, a reconnaissance mission from an unknown alien intelligence. Aris stared at the decoded message, her mind reeling. The cryptic sequence spoke of a far greater conflict, a struggle for galactic dominance that humanity had stumbled into without even realizing it. The Lazarus virus wasn't a random act of aggression, it was a calculated move in a larger, interstellar game.